She stood in the glow of Rockefeller's towering tree, her tailored coat dusted with fresh snow, silver heels clacking against the icy pavement. Kathy Bennett, the youngest female CEO in her firm's history, had just exited a gala where investors toasted her brilliance with champagne she did not finish. Her calendar was full, her inbox flooded, yet her soul felt startlingly empty. The twinkling lights around her only deepened the silence she carried inside. That was when she felt a small tug at her sleeve. She turned, startled, and met eyes that should not have held so much sorrow. A little girl, no more than 7, cheeks red from the cold, clutched a stuffed rabbit and asked with trembling lips, "Can I spend a day with you, ma'am? I do not have mama." Kathy blinked, unsure she had heard right. The girl's eyes searched hers, as if this question was not about a day, but a lifetime. Lena, as she would soon learn, had wandered slightly ahead of her father who was calling out her name in the distance. But for that brief, suspended moment, something cracked inside Kathy. This girl did not know who she was speaking to, did not care about her net worth or press coverage. She just saw a woman who looked like someone who might care. And Kathy, who had spent years earning everything, was suddenly offered something priceless. A chance to mean something to someone. That night, under snowflakes and holiday lights, a question from a motherless child began unraveling everything Kathy thought she knew about success. And somewhere not far behind, a tired man with kind eyes, Lena's father, approached, unaware that his daughter had just changed 3 lives with one sentence. Kathy watched as the man finally reached them, panting, clutching a thermos that steamed slightly in the cold. His coat was worn but clean, his hands cracked from work, and his smile was soft with relief. "Lena," he breathed, pulling the girl close. "You cannot just run off like that." But Lena, still holding Kathy's hand, simply said, "This is the lady I told you about, Daddy. She looks like someone who might stay." Kathy knelt down and asked her name again, and when she heard it, Lena, it echoed like something familiar, something she had once whispered in her dreams but forgotten upon waking. Charles introduced himself next, explaining how he had adopted Lena after finding her abandoned outside a city shelter 2 winters ago. His voice trembled as he spoke, not from cold, but from the weight of remembering. Kathy offered to buy them cocoa, and though Charles politely declined at first, Lena's hopeful eyes changed his mind. Inside the cafe, warmth replaced silence. Lena stirred her drink with a red candy cane, then carefully slid it across the table toward Kathy, saying, "You can have mine. You look like you need sweet things." That moment, so small and innocent, pierced Kathy more than any boardroom betrayal ever had. She looked down at the striped candy, and in that gesture saw her own mother's face, blurred and half-remembered, from a life before ambition took over. As snow began falling harder against the windows, Lena spoke again, softer this time. "Sometimes I pretend ladies in suits are angels who got tired." Charles chuckled awkwardly, but Kathy did not. Her throat tightened as she realized this child saw something in her no one else had bothered to look for in years. That night, she agreed to Lena's strange little wish. One day. Just one. She even set a reminder on her phone. What she did not know then was that one day would turn into a lifetime. The next morning, the city stirred under a thick white blanket. Kathy arrived outside Charles's modest apartment with 2 cups of cocoa, a scarf she had knitted years ago, and uncertainty wrapped tight around her like armor. The building stood in quiet contrast to her penthouse skyline view, its walls chipped and covered in ivy, yet the warmth spilling from the cracked window above told another story. Lena greeted her barefoot, dancing across the floor in mismatched socks and giggling with excitement. She clutched a storybook with a faded cover, one corner taped and pages dotted with crayon hearts. "We saved you the big chair," she said, leading Kathy in like she belonged. There was no fanfare, no staff, just the smell of cinnamon and the hum of a heater doing its best. Charles emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron that read, "Super Dad," in Lena's handwriting. His eyes met Kathy's with cautious gratitude. She noticed the framed drawing above the stove, childlike stick figures holding hands under a Christmas tree. There were 3 people in it, not 2. That detail stayed with her. As the day unfolded, they baked cookies, told stories, and watched a worn copy of It's a Wonderful Life. Lena nestled between them, occasionally leaning her head on Kathy's arm. With every passing hour, Kathy's perfectly curated identity began to loosen. Her phone buzzed with boardroom updates she ignored for the first time in years. Later, while Lena napped on the couch wrapped in Kathy's scarf, Charles shared how he found Lena behind a shelter on Christmas Eve, clinging to a blanket and whispering for someone named Mama. He had just lost his job, yet something told him to pick her up and never let go. Kathy listened, eyes stinging, remembering her own mother's disappearance into illness and silence when she was barely Lena's age. That grief had fueled her climb, but now it simply felt like a wound she had never stopped hiding. The scarf around Lena's shoulders now symbolized something new. Not just warmth, but belonging. Kathy did not say it aloud, but she knew she would return. By the third visit, Kathy no longer brought her briefcase. She came in boots dusted with slush and cheeks flushed from the cold, holding a tin of her mother's old sugar cookie recipe she had not touched in decades. Lena squealed and wrapped her arms around Kathy's waist, dragging her to the small table where a glittered paper crown sat waiting. "You get to be the guest of honor today," she declared, placing the crown crookedly on Kathy's head. Charles watched from the doorway, one eyebrow raised in quiet amusement. Kathy laughed, really laughed, the sound unfamiliar but honest, and for the first time in years, the lines around her eyes softened without force. The paper crown may have been made by a child, but it weighed more than any corporate title ever had. That afternoon, they walked through the Christmas market, hand in hand, Lena's mitten in Kathy's gloved palm. Kathy bought Lena a snow globe, the kind with a tiny cottage inside and glittering flakes that danced when shaken. Lena held it like treasure, then whispered, "If I shake it and wish hard enough, will it make you stay?" Kathy said nothing, just pulled her close and kissed the top of her knitted hat. At a nearby stall, Charles bought 3 candied apples and smiled at Kathy with something deeper than thanks. She felt it then, that quiet pull, not toward ambition or accolades, but toward something grounded and painfully beautiful. That night, Lena asked if she could sleep in Kathy's arms. Charles hesitated, but one look at Kathy's face settled his concern. Wrapped together under a quilt patched with childhood memories, Kathy listened to Lena's breath slow into sleep. Outside, the snow fell steady. Inside, time seemed to pause. In the dark, Charles's voice came soft from the kitchen. "You know, she does not let just anyone in." Kathy replied, "Neither do I." And she meant it. The snow globe sat on the nightstand, still, its flakes settled. But Kathy knew another storm was coming, one not of ice, but of the heart. The storm arrived just 2 days before Christmas. Kathy had returned to her glass-walled office for a final board meeting before the holiday break. She had intended to slip back out unnoticed, return to Charles and Lena by evening, maybe even surprise them with a Christmas tree. But then came the call. Charles's voice was tight with fear. Lena had collapsed at school. Fever. Shallow breathing. She was being rushed to the hospital. Kathy left her presentation mid-sentence, heels echoing like thunder through the marble lobby as she ran. She did not remember the drive, only the sound of her own breath and the thud of her heart against her ribs. When she reached the hospital, Charles sat in the waiting room, his hands shaking as he clutched the stuffed rabbit Lena had carried the night they met. Kathy sat beside him without a word, her hand covering his. Nurses moved around them like shadows. Time blurred. When the doctor finally emerged, the words were merciful. A viral infection. Serious but treatable. She would recover. Kathy's body sagged with relief, and Charles did something unexpected. He reached for her, not just out of gratitude, but instinct. She held him back. Later, as Lena lay sleeping beneath warm lights, her face pale but peaceful, Kathy placed the snow globe beside her bed. "She asked me if I would stay," she whispered. "I think she already knew I would." Charles looked at her, and something changed. They spent that night together in silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. Outside, the hospital window framed the snowfall like a moving painting. Inside, a choice was being made, quiet and complete. Kathy emailed her assistant that morning. She would not be returning after Christmas. She had somewhere more important to be. someone more important to become. Lena stirred and reached for Kathy's hand in her sleep. That was her answer. Christmas morning arrived quietly, with a sky pale as porcelain and rooftops softened under thick snow. Lena awoke in her hospital bed to find her snow globe glowing in the early light, tiny flakes swirling without a shake. Kathy was already there, curled beside her in the chair, wearing the same paper crown Lena had made. "You stayed," Lena said, voice raspy but smiling. Kathy reached over and touched her forehead gently. "Always." Charles entered moments later with a red box tied in gold string. Inside was a necklace, simple, with a small silver charm shaped like a home. He handed it to Lena but looked at Kathy when he said, "Because home is not a place, it is people who stay." Later that day, back at the apartment, Kathy helped Charles string up lights while Lena decorated sugar cookies with too much frosting. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the room. For the first time in years, Kathy laughed without reservation, sang off-key to carols on the radio, and found joy in the rhythm of simple joys. Lena gave Kathy her old stuffed rabbit, saying, "He keeps people from getting lonely. But I do not need him anymore." Kathy held the worn toy to her chest as if it were sacred. That night, as snow began to fall again, the three of them sat by the fireplace with mugs of cocoa, Lena nestled between them under the same quilt. In the flickering warmth, Charles reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Kathy stared, stunned, but he did not say anything at first. He simply opened it. Inside was a ring carved with 3 small initials, one for each of them. "Not just for love," he finally said, "but for promise. For choosing each other. Every day." Kathy's answer came not in words, but in tears, the kind that only come when walls fall. Lena placed the crown back on Kathy's head and whispered, "Now you are really ours." Spring came quietly, melting the last of the city's snow into budding branches and laughter on sidewalks. Kathy had traded boardrooms for community halls, where she now sat beside Charles drafting the charter for their new nonprofit, One More Day. The name had come from Lena herself, after she asked Kathy one morning, "What if we gave other kids one more day with someone kind, like you gave me?" The foundation would support single parents and abandoned children, offering small comforts with lasting impact, from warm meals to bedtime books. Their first donation came not from a corporation, but from a barista who had seen Kathy carry Lena out of the hospital wrapped in her own coat. A ripple had begun, gentle but wide. Each morning, they walked to the office together, Lena skipping ahead with her new backpack, stitched with her name in pink. At night, they returned home to a 2-bedroom apartment filled with drawings taped to the walls, cookies cooling on the counter, and music that no longer echoed but blended. The snow globe sat on a shelf beside photos of all 3 of them, some candid, some blurred, all brimming with a joy that could not be staged. Kathy no longer wore her crown, but Lena still reminded her that she was their queen, and Charles, always steady, called her their lighthouse. At the foundation's first Christmas event, Lena took the microphone and said with careful words, "Sometimes, you only need one person to say yes. And sometimes, that yes becomes forever." Kathy looked on from the edge of the crowd, her eyes shining, her heart fuller than it had ever been under the bright lights of any stage. Charles stood beside her, his arm around her waist, the same ring on her finger now warm from time. In the crowd were parents and children, volunteers and strangers, each drawn by something bigger than presents or lights. They had come because someone stayed. The following winter brought another snowfall, soft and slow, settling gently over the streets like memory itself. Kathy sat on the porch of their modest home, a thermos of cocoa cradled in her hands, watching Lena build snow angels in the front yard. Each movement left a perfect imprint, delicate wings pressed into the earth. Charles stepped out behind her, wrapping a scarf around her shoulders, the same scarf she had once draped over Lena in a hospital bed. Time had moved, but it had not erased anything. If anything, it had deepened everything they held. The nonprofit had grown. Stories from parents flooded in, stories of hope, of reunions, of second chances that started with something as small as a ride, a meal, or a moment. Inside, their living room was filled with warmth and soft clutter. Finger paintings, knit hats, teacups with chipped rims, and a calendar marked with Lena's drawings. Kathy glanced at the snow globe still resting beside the fireplace. Flakes settled like peace. That globe had seen it all. From a silent boardroom exit to Lena's hospital bed, from late-night tears to early morning pancakes. It was more than glass now. It was a reminder of how love begins, not in thunder, but in the softest snowfall. Lena burst through the door, cheeks pink, her hands carrying a bundle of letters from children they had helped. "This one says thank you for a bed," she beamed. "And this one says someone finally tucked them in." Kathy took the letters, touched each one with reverence, and then looked up at Charles. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she had not asked me that question?" Charles smiled, pulling her close. "I think she saved us both," he said. Kathy nodded, pressing the letters to her chest. She knew now that family was never just blood. It was staying again and again when you did not have to. A few days before the next Christmas gala for One More Day, Kathy found Lena sitting alone by the fireplace, the stuffed rabbit on her lap and the snow globe balanced beside her knee. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside, everything was still. "What are you thinking about?" Kathy asked, kneeling beside her. Lena looked up, eyes older than her years. "Do you remember when I first asked if I could spend a day with you?" Kathy smiled and nodded. "You said yes," Lena whispered, "but you stayed longer than a day. You stayed forever." Kathy reached over and brushed a strand of hair from Lena's forehead, her voice gentle. "Because sometimes one day is all it takes to find out where you belong." Later that evening, while helping Charles assemble welcome kits for new families, Kathy found a faded post-it note tucked between 2 packets of cocoa. In Lena's handwriting it read, "One more day, one more hug, one more story." The same phrase was now etched into the foundation's mission wall. Kathy ran her fingers over it, overwhelmed. Every small act they had offered, each coat given, each bedtime story read, each ride to school, was a piece of the promise they had made to one little girl who had once been brave enough to ask. That Christmas gala was held beneath fairy lights in the local community center. Volunteers and families lined the room, each holding a candle as Lena stood at the front stage. Her voice was steady, her words wrapped in wonder. "I asked for a day. I got a family. And now we help others feel the same." The room erupted into soft applause, some teary-eyed, others smiling through it. Kathy and Charles watched from the wings, their fingers intertwined. It no longer mattered what she had built in the past. What mattered was what she held now. Something real. Something that stayed. Weeks later, Lena sat cross-legged in the center of a circle of children at the shelter, gently rocking the same stuffed rabbit that once never left her side. A little boy beside her had been silent for days. Tonight, he leaned his head on her shoulder and whispered, "Can I stay one more night?" Lena smiled and nodded, her voice barely above a breath. "You can stay as long as you need." Kathy watched from across the room, tears catching in her throat. It was not just that Lena had healed. It was that she had begun to heal others. Charles placed a hand on Kathy's shoulder, and in that quiet moment, the full-circle power of kindness wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Everything they had given had multiplied, returned to them in ways no dollar ever could. Social media had already started buzzing weeks earlier, but now a local reporter's video clip of Lena's Christmas speech was going viral. Comments poured in, calling it the most moving holiday story of the year. A teacher from Oklahoma sent a message saying, "I played this for my class, and not one child spoke during the entire video." Another commenter wrote, "I used to think charity was money. This changed me." Strangers began tagging each other, sharing their own stories of being helped, seen, believed in. The video was just 3 minutes long, but in it was a lifetime of heart. Donations flooded in. Families from neighboring cities asked how they could replicate the One More Day model. Kathy received a call from a national nonprofit asking for guidance. But for Kathy and Charles, it was never about scaling or stats. It was about Lena, about children like her, and about a promise that no child should ever beg for love. This scene, quiet and radiant, became the heartbeat of the home. A girl once overlooked now stood at the center of a movement built on soft yes, late-night soup, and stories whispered under fleece blankets. And for the first time in years, Kathy did not feel like she had lost her empire. She had simply built another, brick by brick, out of grace. A quiet girl with trembling hands, a couple who had lost everything, and a shelter that almost shut its doors. This was not just a story about pain. It was a journey of rediscovery, of connection rebuilt through hot meals, open arms, and a simple promise to stay one more night. Lena's transformation from a scared child into a quiet leader proved that even shattered beginnings can bloom into something breathtaking. Kathy and Charles, once surrounded by wealth, found a deeper treasure in healing hearts instead of counting profits. The impact of one small act rippled outward, from a cold cot in a forgotten shelter to a movement that touched thousands. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, breathe deeper, or remember someone who once gave you hope, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Every story we tell honors the hidden kindness and second chances that change lives. Your support keeps these voices alive and helps us bring more true, heartwarming stories to light. Let us remind the world that compassion still matters, that grace is louder than grief, and that love, when passed on, becomes the miracle someone else is waiting for.